Hello, today we're going to be doing lesson 752. And this lesson is going to be about using number lines to add integers, meaning to add positives and negatives. So please go ahead and take a minute to pause and tell me how you're feeling. You can slide it if you're not feeling so great today, all the way to you're feeling great. All right. And if you'd like to tell me more, you can. All right. So for this first slide, we're going to be using number lines just like this today to, like I said, add integers. So I want you to kind of take a minute to look at each one of these and try to figure out which one doesn't belong. I've gone ahead and made the number lines a little bit larger for us to look at. Okay. So we can kind of go through this. There's a lot of different things that you could say. In fact, you could probably argue how each and every one of them doesn't belong, right? Um, for me, I look at this and I see that this one doesn't belong. When I looked at the others, I noticed the other ones had a line in the positives. This one doesn't. Both lines are in negatives. This one has a line in the positives, and this one's partially there. This one's all in the positives. If you're looking at this one here, you could say that, it kind of goes into the positives first and then ends in the negatives. So it's in both positive and negative. So that could be a reason why that one doesn't belong. This is the only one that ends in the positive side. So it starts here at 0, it goes in the positives, and it goes in the positives even more. So it kind of ends at positive 7. You could say that this one doesn't belong because it actually ends up where it started at 0. Okay? Um, so here's the deal. We're basically going to be using these kind of like in a hot air balloon, we're always starting at 0, right? The same thing is going to be true for these. And if you notice, every single one has an arrow, and this is the starting point for these, right? The end that doesn't have the arrow shows you where that particular line starts. And if we look at all of these, they start at 0, or they have a line that starts at 0. So in this case, this is showing that whatever's going on went up 3, right? And so then it ends there. And then from 3, it went up 4 more and ended at 7, right? So if I'm looking at this looks at something like 3 plus another 4 is 7. That's how I would say that number line. If I'm looking at this one, again, this arrow starts at 0 here. So this one, I'm seeing it went up 3. So it's up 3, or right, starts at 3 in a way. And then from 3, the arrow is going to the left. And I know that that means that it's going down. So it's actually going to the negatives. So we're going to say that that was a 3 plus. Well, how far back did it go? It went 3, right? It went back 3, and then it went a whole nother 6. So I added a negative 9, right? Because this shows 3 spots, and this shows another 6. So that means this line itself is actually worth 9. So it went backwards 9 jumps. And remember, mathematicians use parentheses anytime we have a negative number behind a plus or a minus sign. Okay? And then let's just take a look at these. For this one, if I was going to write an equation showing what's happening, the first thing that happened, we start at 0. It went up 3. So I know that's a positive 3. And then I know it also went from there, it went back 3. So we added a negative 3. And so I know that ends up at 0, right? Because that's where it ends, 0. And finally, this is the only one, remember, that ended in a negative. So we started at 0, but we went backwards, right? We're going to the left, which means we're actually going negatives. So it went -4 first because this line is going back, so it's negative, and the jump is 4. The line is worth 4. And from there, so it started at -4, but then it went back to -9. And if you count that out, that's another 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that line's actually -5. So to -4, we actually went back or added 5 more negatives. And we know that that now equals -9. Okay. So today, that's really what we're working on. We're going to be able to use a number line to help solve these types of equations. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. All right. And the next slide. So here's what it says. It says complete the table and draw a number line diagram for each situation. I did the first one as an example. So here's the example. Okay, and I'm looking at the number line. I'm noticing the negatives are down here. The positives are over here. I'm also noticing all these number lines are the same, meaning they're starting at -40. They end with +50, and they're all going up by 5, right? So 40, 35, 30, 25, 20, 15. So each little line on these number lines means 5. It's important to know. All right, so here's my table. So they're telling us here's where we're starting, here's what's changing, and here's where that ends up then. And then we have to write an addition expression to show what happened. Okay, so let's look at this first example that was already done. It says to start at +40. So if we look at the number line for A, I started at 0 because we always are going to start at 0, right? And from there, we draw a line. You can use the line tool. That's probably easiest. And from 0, I ended at 40, right? Because it said to go, the starting was +40. So we start at 0, we end at +40. And from there was a change. So we're talking about temperature here. So if you start at 40 degrees and then it gets 10 degrees warmer, on the number line, what that's going to look like is from the 40, it's going to go up 10 degrees, right? So this line is actually worth 10, right? So 5, 10, and I ended at 50. So that's a +10, right? And this is a +40. So if we look at an addition sentence for what's happening here, we had 40. And remember, mathematicians don't write a positive number in front of it, so it's just 40 plus 10 degrees. So, and that's 10 degrees warmer, so that means that that's a +10. So 40 plus 10. So now let's try B. And notice, I'm also noticing these are all starting the same way, except for this one is getting 5 degrees colder after we started at 40 degrees. So on B, again, my start's going to look the same. I'm going to start at 0, right? And I know that the starting temperature is 40. So I'm going to go to here to 40. I'm going to draw my little arrow showing the direction, right? So we started at 0, go to 40. And then it told us that from 40, it actually got 5 degrees colder. So I know from 40, I need to go back this way 5 degrees, right? Because that's showing colder. So from 40, I just go back to 35 because that's 5 degrees. And I'm going to add my arrow showing the direction. Okay, so I know that this was +40. This line stands for +40 and it came first. I know that this line is actually a -5, right? Because it's showing -5 going back 5 degrees. So, and I can look, I ended up at 35 degrees. That's where this line ends up. So I ended at positive 35. That's what they're asking us to do. And then the addition expression is, we know we started with positive 40, so we just started at 40 degrees. And we add, we add, this stands for negative, right? 5 degrees colder, so we're adding a -5. Okay, so mine didn't quite fit. I probably could have not used the spaces and it would fit. Okay, oops. All right, so there's my expression. Okay, so we're going to do the same thing for C, D, and E. I want you to pause and I want you to try these. At least try C on your own. Okay, so C says we're starting at positive 40 and it gets 30 degrees colder. So on the diagram, again, we're starting with a line that goes to 40, starts at 0, goes to 40. And then we know it got 30 degrees colder. So that means we have to go back this way because to the left means colder. To the right means it's getting warmer. So I'm going to go back 30 degrees. So that's 10, 20, 30 degrees. So I know that this line up here stands for -30 because it went back 30. This one stands for positive 40. And I'm also making note, this ending temperature was 10 degrees. So if we start at 40 degrees, it gets 30 degrees colder. We end up at 10 degrees. The addition expression is going to be 40 degrees. And since it's telling us it's addition, we do plus, and then that's -30 degrees. Whoops. And I'm using parentheses to show the -30 since it follows an addition sign. Okay, next one, 40 degrees is where we start, and then it gets 40 degrees colder. So we're just following the same exact pattern here, where I'm going to start at 0 degrees. The first thing says we start at 40, so I'm going to make my arrow end there. So I know that's a plus 40. Then it says it got 40 degrees colder from this point. So we need to go back 40. So that's easy because I know this line is already 40. So I'm going to go back that same amount. And I know this stands for -40. And my ending temperature is 0. It's the same that I started at. So my final was 0. My addition statement is going to look like 40 plus, and then it got colder, so it's -40. And I know the answer is 0. And then the last one, 40 degrees is my starting point, but then it gets 50 degrees colder. So this is where I might start trying to guess where the ending is going to be. And I kind of know that if I start at 40 degrees, so it's 40 degrees above 0, I know that if it gets 50 degrees colder, I'm going to expect this to end up in the negatives because I know 50 degrees colder is more than 40 degrees, right? So that means we have to go backwards more than what we started with. So let's make that number line. So I know from positive 40 to 0, that's 40 degrees, right? And then we have to go another 10 degrees to make it 50. Right? So we went backwards 50. 40 degrees plus another 10 degrees is 50. And so I am seeing, just like I predicted, that because we went back more than what we started with, we ended up in the negatives. And this time it's -10 degrees. So if your starting temperature is a positive 40, and then you add negative 50, you end up at negative 10. So that was my final temperature. And it was 40 plus negative 50. And now I have submitted my work. So make sure for this slide, I should be seeing both the number lines filled out and the table. And we're ready to go. All right, this is the same thing, except it says complete the table and draw a number line for each situation. Here's our situations. Okay, so now I'm noticing we're not actually starting in the positives for this one. We are starting in the negatives. So I want you to pause and I want you to try doing what we did on the last slide, but for these situations. And then I'll be back to, you will be back to check your work. Okay, so we're starting with negative 20 degrees and we're getting 30 degrees warmer. So when I come up here, I'm going to remember on my number lines, we'll start with negative 20 degrees, right? Negative 20. So that means our first number line we're going to do, we always start at 0, okay? We go back to negative 20 degrees. So this line is 20 degrees, but negative, right? So here's our starting point. I know that this is negative 20 degrees, right? And from there, so remember, if the temperature gets colder, the arrow is going to go this direction. If the temperature gets warmer, it's going to go this direction. So in this case, it got 30 degrees warmer. So my line has to kind of start where we ended off, but it's got to get warmer 30 degrees. Okay, so when I'm drawing my line, I know the line I drew already was 20, right? So now I just got to make this one 10 more. So that's 20, 25, 30. So there's 30 degrees. This line is showing a 30 degrees increase in temperature, right? So it's plus 30. So when I did the negative 20 and I added 30 degrees to it, we ended up at 10 degrees positive. So my final temperature was 10 degrees. In this case, we started with a negative, so negative 20 degrees plus 30 degrees. And it's positive, so I just write plus 30. So it's negative 20 plus 30. We're going to do the same thing for this one. And in fact, they all start at negative 20. So I actually know every single one of my number lines that we're going to work on today is going to start with going from 0 to negative 20, right? 0 to negative 20. They're all negative 20 starts. Okay. And just to remember, we put the arrow to show which direction. This was going negative. Okay, so for this one, it was a negative 20 start, but then it got 35 degrees warmer for B. So that means the next line I draw has to be 35. So it has to be at least 35 long, but we've got to start it where we ended off, and we're getting warmer, so it's going to the right. So this line is 20 degrees, but we need to make it 35. So there's 20, 25, 30, 35, right? So this one, the line is 35 and it's positive, and we ended at 15 degrees. So my final temperature was 15. We started at negative 20, so my addition statement that's showing what happened is that we started at negative 20, but then we add 35 positives, and we ended at 15. So negative 20 plus 35 is actually 15. Okay? Next one, we get 15 degrees warmer for C. So if this is where we started at negative 20, from there, this line has to be 15 degrees, but going in the positive direction to the right. So 5, 10, 15. Okay, put my arrow this way. So when I add the positive 15, I'm still in the negatives, but now I'm at only -5. So the answer here, the final amount was -5 degrees. If we looked at this as an addition expression, it's -20 plus 15, positive 15. Okay. All right, let's look at this one. It says you start at -20, but in this time, we're going to get 15 degrees colder. So for D, we're looking at, we started here at our -20 like always, but now it's getting colder, so we have to go to the left. So that means 5, 10, 15. Right? So this line is actually the same as this line in size, right? They're both 15s, but this is representing a positive 15 because I went to the right. This one's actually a -15 because it got colder, so it went to the left. And again, this was the negative. So our ending temperature when it gets 15 degrees colder is -35. So add that in and put our number sentence. It was -20 plus, this time it got colder, so it's -15. So -20 plus -15. And finally, this last one is -20. So we're starting the same like always, right? There's our -20, but this time it got 20 degrees warmer. So that means from here, it actually went to the right the same amount, right? So we started at -20, but then it got 20 degrees warmer. So we added a positive 20 and we ended at 0. And our number statement, -20 plus 20, and we know that is 0. And then we can submit our work. Okay. So now what we're going to do, we're going to use the same idea, only this time they have a number line as a temperature thermometer, right? And we're going to do the same thing, except they're giving us the starting information and the change, just like what we had over here, right? We had a starting temperature, we had a change in temperature, and then we'll get a final temperature on that. So we're doing the same thing. They're just giving it to us in a word form first. So take a minute to look at this. Okay, so it says one winter day, the temperature in Houston is 8 degrees Celsius. In Orlando, it's 10 degrees warmer than it is in Houston. Use the tool to model the situation. And actually, you'll see that when we put in some things here, it's going to show us on the tool. Okay, so the starting temperature we're going to say is this, right? It's Houston's temperature of 8 degrees. So the starting temperature was 8 degrees, and that's positive. Notice what's happened. It started at 0. It went up 8 degrees, right? For this one, it's going up. Each one of these, I'm always noticing the scale. So the big lines go up 10, right? So it's like 0, then 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. But then those little lines, I have to kind of understand what's happening there too. So let's see, they go up. It's not ones. I can tell that those aren't 10 marks. So let's try twos. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Okay, so these are going up by twos. Now, the change, it said it got warmer. So I know that warmer temperatures means positives. So that's went up 10. And again, you can see it's showing us what's happening. Let's see what the equation that is. Okay. So it's showing an 8 first. From 8, we went up 10, and we ended up at 18. So you can see why the equation's important. It does the math for us in this case. So we know the temperature in Orlando is 18 degrees Celsius. Okay? Same thing, right? We're starting in Houston. It's a winter day. The temperature in Houston's 8 degrees. In Salt Lake City, it's 8 degrees colder. Okay, so the only difference is when I put that into the change, we have to remember colder means we're going to be going down. And so that change went down, not up. So you have to put a negative in front of the 8. So here's what happened. It's 0 degrees in Orlando because the positive 8 plus the negative 8 actually canceled each other out. We end up at 0. Same situation. Houston, it's starting at an 8 degrees temperature. In Minneapolis, it's 20 degrees colder. Again, colder. If you look on here, if we want to make this temperature from here go down, get colder, we have to go down the number line. So we have to make sure we put in negative 20 because it's telling us the temperature went down. When we do that, if you look at 8 plus negative 20, you end up in the negatives, right? You end up at negative 12. And the next one is a little bit different. So for this one, they're actually going backwards. We are, instead of getting a situation, we're getting the equation. So we're going to have to make our own situation for this one. So why don't you pause, try to make a situation that shows this happening. And if you're not sure, maybe start by putting in what's happening, right? So in the equation, we started at 27, and that's positive 27, right? And they're using degrees. We are on a temperature scale, so your story has to be about temperature. And we know it's getting colder, right? So I'm putting in negative 11. And the temperature, we can put the equation to double check too. Look, this matches up. They don't use parentheses, but it still matches up, right? So we know the ending temperature is 16. So you can make up any story you want. I will use, all right, so in Louisville, it was 27 degrees, but then a cold front moved in. Cold fronts bring cold temperature. So the temperature dropped 11 degrees. Okay, and that's my story. You can make up your own. Let's check out the next slide. Okay, again, they want you to draw a number line to show the story, right? So on Tuesday at lunchtime, it was 29 degrees. Draw a line to show that it's our starting time or our starting temperature was 29 degrees. We start at 0. This is going up by 5, so I know 29 is going to be just before that 30. This is also why I like to put on here the actual numbers because it helps me out. By sunset, the temperature dropped, okay, I'm noticing something. It dropped to 16 degrees. A lot of students would see this and say, oh, my line has to go back because it's dropping, which is true, but it has to go back and the line has to be 16 long. That's not true. It's saying it dropped to 16 degrees. So I'm going to start where we left off at 29, right? But I have to make this go back and end at the 16 degree mark, right? So I'm finding that that's probably about here, right? It's between 15 and 20, a little bit more after the 15, slightly after 15. So I know now it went backwards, it dropped, and it ended at 15 or at 16 degrees. So now this is showing this, right? We started at 29, we went back and ended at 16. Now, write an expression to represent the situation. Okay, this gets a little tricky because I know it's 29, right? And I also know that we added a negative number because we went backwards, but we have to figure out how much did we have to go back to get to 16? Because we actually know the answer. Whoops, I don't actually need this here. So the answer is negative 6 or positive 16, right? But how do we get there? You have to figure out how big is that. So let's see. If this was 30, let's say this was 30, I'd have to go back to get to 16. That would be 5, 10, and then another 4, right? Do you see what I did there? If we start at 30 to get to 16, it would be 5, 10, and then 11, 12, 13, 14. So that's 14. However, this isn't 30, is it? So it's like one backwards, one less, right? So it'd be 29 to 25 is 4. And then that would be another 5. So that's 9. And then 10, 11, 12, 13. So we're actually adding a negative 13. And we end up with 16. So I'm going to write that. So we started at 29 degrees. We added negative 13. And I could even write in that that equals positive 16. And the temperature at sunset was 16 degrees. And then here I can explain my thinking, right? So I know that it, started at 29 degrees and you have to go backwards on the number line 14 by 13 times to get to 16 degrees. Okay. All right. Now, for this part, I want you to just write a little reflection, right? Tell me, does this help you understand something else? Did it make you wonder about a topic? Did you uncover something you were unsure about? Maybe just tell me, did you learn anything? What did you learn? So write at least one of the aboves. Think of one of these to write about. When you're finished, you're going to do the same thing, except it says, what would be a good mistake a student might make in this lesson? So a good mistake would be something that would highlight, oh, this is where we have to be careful, right? So it would help us learn something. Then you're going to go ahead and tell me, how did things go today in your math lesson? And tell me more about it if you'd like to. And then you're going to make sure that you click you're done here and then go back to Google Classroom and mark your assignment, your lesson 752 done. All right, so congratulations, you are finished.